give you a practical example. When you're driving down the street and you see a sign that says limit 55, that means different things to different people. Some people say, okay, I'm going to set my control at 52 or maybe 53, so when I'm going down the hill, I don't exceed 55. Other people say, nope, that's just a guideline, because you got a cushion of 3 or 4 miles an hour, so I'm going to go 59, but I'm going to kind of watch things. So the same sign, but they interpret it differently. Then there's other people who have the hot hatch or maybe old Barracuda, and that doesn't apply to them because that limit is a minimum. You don't want to go under 55. So that's a different, and maybe you have an old farm truck, and 45 is where you comfortably go, and I'm sure you've been behind those people going down the road. Same sign, 55 limit, but you filter through your worldview. It means something entirely different to different people. So how do we look at things and interpret that? So why is the world the way it is? How did it come into being? Or has it always been here? 100 years ago, Albert Einstein thought the world was eternal. It had always been here. It always was that way, but things have come, like the cosmic microwave background radiation, better understanding of entropy has said, no, that's not an option. It came into being some way or another. Well, was it a series of random events, which is the evolutionary concept, or was it design? It's kind of those two. So think of that filter as we look at some of the data I'll be showing you. Now, how do we choose a worldview? There's a different basis for doing it. One example, or one basis for doing that, once you're a Christian, you have inside knowledge, you have assurance. But that's only after you're a Christian. Until you're a Christian, you don't have this feeling, I know this is right. So you've maybe been to church, you read the Bible, you've studied archaeology, and those kind of things have formulated how it came into being. Was it created, or did it come into being in a big bang and then slowly change? So what values do you change? And I want to give you the concept of intelligent design as a relatively new point of view to looking at this thing. This intelligent design as a term has been around maybe 20, 30 years. I'm going to talk about evolution from an engineering perspective. The theory has been carefully crafted over about 150 years. And it's been, people criticize it, and someone will come with an answer, well, no, here's the way this is better, so evolution is true. And we hear that. I mean, you think if you go to a library, if you go to a secular school, if you go and watch TV programs, they're all based on the secular view of evolution is true. It happened. It's kind of taken over the media. But then there's a few people, probably a lot in this room, who say, no, that's not right. What is your basis? Well, I want to give you some additional basis for a decision that there is a designer behind this. Why is there a picture of a house here? And I think of that as an engineering point of view. Evolution concept, the theory of evolution, has been carefully crafted to make it look good. So if you're wanting to buy a house, one factor in buying a house is curb appeal. You walk on the outside and you say, boy, the shrubs are nice, it's trimmed lawn, it's painted nicely, it's got a wonderful design, I want to buy that house. As an engineer, I'm going to say, well, wait a minute, I want to go inside and look. Is that old water system? Is there corrosion there? Are the floors sagging? Are there termites? There's a lot of things that you can't see from the outside, only by studying it. And intelligent design is a way of really looking at things from a scientific viewpoint. I'm going to use data that you will find out in textbooks, online. I just interpret it to see the things that are not obvious to people who are taking an evolutionary point of view. There's things that are down inside there. As you look at it carefully, evolution has gaps. Some people say, oh, well, when you're looking at Christianity, You're going on the basis of belief. It's faith. Science is true. Well, we're going to look at some of these science things, and evolution has a lot of faith behind it as well. That's not well supported. And we're going to be looking at some of those on the other side to show, wait a minute, they kind of glossed over that, and they didn't talk about that. Look at it very carefully and see what's there. Another way of looking at it from an engineering point of view, if you've done computer programming, there's something called a flow chart. That's an outline of, well, I'm going to take data here, this, and I'm going to go through this process, and it's going to come to my solution. I think the theory of evolution is kind of like a flow chart. It really is kind of an overall picture. But when you look at it, there are some gaps, there's some missing pieces, and intelligent design looks at some of those and say, wait, this doesn't make any sense. There's no way to connect this to that. There's a gap in there that just doesn't flow. So we're going to focus on those challenges, and then we're going to look at what does that mean. This is a general outline. First, I want to define evolution because there's lots of different aspects to evolution. One, some people might say, well, we're in a situation. The situation has evolved. Well, there the situation has changed. That's one use of the term evolution, not referring necessarily to biology. So we're going to look at some of those things and see what that is. Here's a picture that I take that's commonly out there where even evolutionists can kind of tongue-in-cheek poke fun at it. You'll notice that people, you've got an obvious simian ape at the left going upright carrying a spear. Someone looks like a kind of Neanderthal in the middle, and then you see the guy in the suit bending over, and then finally at a death. So it looks like you went up, evolved, and now you're devolving again. So they've got a good sense of humor looking at that things always don't move upward. So one aspect is change over time, random variations and response to environmental changes. I believe that. I accept that. You do not look like your parents. You do not look like your children exactly. There's differences. Things change. Even if you have a litter of kittens or puppies, they are different. Some will have a different coloration, a longer body, bigger paws, longer ears, whatever it be. They are not cookie cutter identical. They vary. So I believe there is change over time. I believe that wolf could get faster because the faster wolves will catch the deer more often than the slow wolf. That could happen. Next thing is survival of the fittest. I also believe there's survival of the fittest. An example of that is I could show you my front lawn. There are things in my front lawn that I don't want there. I take those things out of my lawn. I spray it, I dig things up, I transplant. There's things I do, it doesn't stay that way. There are fitter things growing in my front lawn. So these are two aspects of the theory of evolution. But there's more. There's also undirected advancement of life from simple to complex. That's one of the challenging ones because I do not see that's been demonstrated. It's postulated that's how we went from single cell to simple creatures to birds to mammals to man. I don't think we have an example of that. People take fossils and line them up, but there's not a good path putting that in that order. It could be in a different order. So they've made some assumptions there that are not well supported. And then finally, there's one more, development of life from non-life. That's a key thing. How did life start? How do you define life? And people have been working on the origin of life for a long time and haven't got very far. When people say, oh, we've done some simple making of amino acids, often it's very high quality, purified material. That's not what you would find out in nature. So they've forced it in a way, but still, these last two things have gaps in there. And I would say these are the ones that are not supported. So I need to have, when someone says, do you believe in evolution? It's, well, there's two aspects I believe in. Here's two aspects I don't believe in. So the next thing that we've kind of talked about what evolution is, let's talk about intelligent design and what does that bring to the debate about things. So most important thing is 150 years or so, 170 years now, research has revealed the complexity of life. We've got better microscopes, we've got better DNA sampling, we've got a lot of ways to understand how complex it is. Darwin had a very simplistic view of the cell. Their microscope was very poor resolution, so they could see inside there, but it looked like kind of like jellyfish, that there's only jelly inside that cell. They didn't know that there's muscles in there that make that jellyfish move. Also, we now know that inside the cell there's molecular machines that provide function. And I'll be showing you some pictures of some of those components inside that have functions. The molecular machines at the next level are made of proteins. Next level down, the building blocks of proteins are amino acids. So we put amino acids together into chains that are proteins. We put the proteins in the cell to have them function, and we build it up from there. But there's more. The instructions for the molecular machines are embedded in DNA. We transfer the data over to a little machine, ribosome, that makes more, puts amino acids into a protein. So here's a machine that makes proteins. It needs instructions. It just doesn't automatically assemble. And the code is hidden in there. Now the real question is, how did that information appear? And of course, evolution says it's very stepwise, but you say, well, wait a minute. That's the big picture. That's like the flow chart approach. Let's look very carefully and explain how this could happen. That brings us now to intelligent design and irreducible complexity. And let's look at intelligent design a little more. Intelligence says the world appears designed. If you saw something complicated, you'd say, wait, that didn't just happen. That wasn't just condensed from minerals. The wind didn't blow it around and make it that way. That was design. So things like computer, no one would say, oh, the computer just came about from things like rain falling or something. It requires a lot of knowledge and special equipment to do that. So those changes are beyond what we would expect from just minerals and forming on its own. Now, I don't use the Bible to prove this because intelligent design is separated from the Bible in a way. Because there's people who said, oh, the Bible, that's just fables, it's been changed over the years, it's got errors in it, I can't believe the Bible. Intelligent design uses accepted science to look at what's going on. But intelligent design is fully compatible with the Bible, and we know that there. If you look in Psalm 19, you go Romans chapter 1, you see that God's craftsmanship or handiwork, if you like the older term, is visible out there. And that's what we're going to be looking at, is God's craftsmanship on these very fine scales, how impossible it is. You probably know Richard Dawkins, the anti-God evolution. He has a very famous quote. Biology is the study of complicated things that have the appearance of having been designed with a purpose. I've underlined that word appearance. So was it designed with a purpose, or does it just appear to be designed with a purpose? When I look at that quote, for some reason my mind goes back to The Wizard of Oz. So I hope you've all seen that movie. It's wonderful if you haven't. So imagine Dorothy and friends are going into the wizard, and the wizard is blasting at them and trying to beat them down, but Toto goes over to the curtain and pulls it back. So when I see that word about appearance of having been designed, it's like Richard Dawkins is saying, don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain. and that's, so I want, if you want to remember one thing, that's an image that I think there's a lot of misdirection out there trying to say, don't pay attention to what you see out there. It's only an appearance. I would strongly disagree. So let's try and look at some examples of intelligent design, and I'm going to go into more detail, but just at this first level, integration of systems in our body. You've got the respiration system, you've got the digestive system, the endocrine system, the nervous system, the reproductive system. I should have made a list of all of them. In the talks, I do have these in more detail, but Pastor John wanted me to give sort of an overview of intelligent design, so I'm taking bits and pieces of probably 6 different talks and kind of cram them together here. So it might not flow as well as some of the individual talks that focus on these, but at least you'll get a taste of what these are, and I can always give you more data in the future. Or also on the table in the back, we have some publications from an organization called Discovery Institute, and they're one of the leaders in intelligent design, and they focus on a lot of this stuff, and some of this information comes from those books. The climate on Earth is another one. It's really fine-tuned. Is it unusual that we are here, but there aren't people on other planets? If you look at old science fiction papers or articles from H.G. Wells and Jules Verne, they were thinking there was life on other planets. Lots of life, lots of other planets. We don't see that. We've gone to looking at them. I mean, in our mind, there should be a lot of other life. We think of Captain Kirk, who seemed to always find planets that had women walking around in togas. I don't know how, but I guess that was very appealing at the time, where poor Captain Picard and Captain Janeway just ran into Klingons and Romulans much more. They had a much sadder time of it. That's a vision of science fiction. It's very appealing to imagine there's all these things out there to explore and other civilizations. Well, we haven't seen them. Here's an example of irreducible complexity. This is from a book called Darwin's Black Box by Michael Behe. And in there, he uses an example of the mousetrap. Look at the pieces of the mousetrap. Every piece is essential. The spring is essential. The latch is essential. The cheese or some other attractant is essential. Even the base is essential. If you put these in a box, you don't have a mousetrap. They have to be all there, and they have to be intelligently designed. If you don't assemble it, if you have a box of pieces, it's not a mousetrap. You can shake it, you can put it out in the sun, let the wind blow, water, whatever. It's not going to be a mousetrap. There's intelligent design putting these pieces together, and you need all these pieces. If you take one of these away, it's not functional anymore. It's not really a mousetrap. So from a we'll put a little humor in here, how would you have intelligent design mouse? That would definitely make their life a little easier. Why do we have unusual events? Are they amazing coincidences? You often heard that term. Well, that's an amazing coincidence. Is there divine providence? And here's one that's often used by atheists. Of course it's this way. Otherwise we wouldn't be here. The counters of fine-tuning argument that we have what we need. We have the minerals we need for our bodies. We have the right atmosphere to breathe. We have the right sun. There's a whole list of things, some of which I'll mention. But it's amazing how all the things are there, but a evolutionist can say, well, no, it's here. It's just like throws away all the amazing part of that, of God's criteria or his craftsmanship that put things together. So we're going to try and look at some unusual events. and see if they are convincing, if they suggest intelligent design. First one is I want to look a little bit at eyes. So you've got the eye chart there. It gets better, better, better. When you look at the evolution approach, they show, in fact, the next slide, I'm going to show you a series of different eyes from different creatures, and they show how, well, this one was earlier, this one's later, later, later. But you need to have a basic functionality. You have to even be able to first see light. So the evolutionist point of view has a simple eye spot in a single cell creature like you might find in a pond. Then the one to the right of them is a little cup shape that collects the light better, is more effective. Then the next one over, from a pinhole eye from a nautilus, it's even better. It looks more like an eye. The next one over, you have a lens. And then finally, at the farthest to the right, from octopus, you have an iris and a refractive lens all around here. So they line these up and say, okay, we'll start simple, go more complex, more complex, more complex. And that's how it evolved. I don't think there's really a good basis for saying that's how it evolved and how it got there. But I'm going to focus just on step number one, an eye spot. How do you go from no spot to an eye spot? What's required for an eye spot? And I'm going to use my example of something called Chlamydomonas. That's a little creature, single cell creature you would find in a pond water area. Let's see, I don't know if in the back you can see, but there's a lot of items in that cell. All these things are required in there. It's almost like a little city, self-sustaining, because it's got a power plant. All of us, from single cell up to here, we run on chemical energy. We ingest food, carbohydrates, protein, our body breaks that down, goes through our system. We are burning that energy using oxygen to run our system for roughly 85 years, plus or minus, and that keeps us going. The single cell, which obviously doesn't last very long, still needs that energy. It's a lot simpler, but it has to have a control. It has to have a way to function with that energy. And not only that, but inside there are some chlorophyll areas where it can actually make its own food. So a single cell Chlamydomonas in sunlight will generate its own food. So it's kind of like plant animal, and it has flagella, so it actually move around. So imagine a leaf falls on a pond and it's in shadow and it's not making that food. It can move itself into the light and start generating its own food again. Amazing creature. How did that get to be? How did all these things come together? We don't have time to look at all the complexity, but let's just focus on the eye spot. What is the eye spot? What are the parts of an eye spot? Well, an eye spot has roughly 200 proteins, and each of these are 300 to 700 amino acids long. So they were put together, and that's what's functioning in there to recognize light and send it to the central control area and allow the Chlamydomonas to move around to a different location. How did that come about? How would they form? If you don't have on all of them, enough of them, it doesn't function. Well, if you would look at what it takes, you can do a map model of saying, let's say you had all of them except 10. So you had 190 of the required amino acids. How do you build those 10? Well, you need to have a plan, and that's where the ribosome comes in. The ribosome builds it, but they've never made one before. There isn't any plan. So it's like somehow randomly generating these proteins from amino acids. Now, Betsy has done a calculation as a biostatistician showing how many trials you'd have to do to randomly put together 10 of these, assuming that all except 10 were there, and only 100 amino acids long. That number is beyond astronomical. It's more than the number of atoms in the known universe. Different ways of putting these together. How could that happen in a fundamental time? If you come up with models saying, well, okay, we're going to make a pond, and we're going to allow those things to move through there, the time is much longer than the known or estimated life of the universe to make that happen. It just can't happen by chance. Say, well, wait a minute, well, maybe on their first chance it just happened. Well, yeah, but that takes you back to faith again. So I guess the atheist has to believe the faith that would happen early in the process. On the other side, you can make the same wrong one again and again and again. There's no way of saying, oh, that's wrong, I'm not going to repeat that error. So when you do random walk kind of calculations, it just doesn't work out, it doesn't happen. Let's move on to another aspect. Privileged Planet is a book that looks at how fortunate we are on Earth here. We have so many things that are all put together that make everything work. If one of these is wrong, we're not going to be here because we can't exist. Right distance from the sun. It really is a Goldilocks phenomena. If you're too close to the sun, we don't see any life on Mercury or Venus. We don't see any life, although we're still looking on Mars, see if there's some there, but you go out, it gets too cold. You really want liquid water, so it has to be the right distance from the sun. Also need a very stable sun. There are suns that oscillate and have solar flares. Ours is unusually stable. It's unusually circular orbit. You look at the orbit of Neptune, which is very elliptical. It goes closer and further from the sun, and it's on a different plane. Even if it was the right distance, it would be too hot at some time, too cold at other times for water, for life to exist. The magnetic shielding, the core of the Earth has a magnet. And of course, that's why we have a compass that works, because that looks at the magnetic field and follows that. The also has atmosphere. There's an ozone layer that is up there that's protecting certain things. If we didn't have that, we might have too many cosmic rays coming in. So the atmosphere, ozone layer, those things are all up there and are very important to us. That's why when they're talking about Mars and trying to build a habitat, they have to have special shielding. Plus the air pressure is too low, and there's too much carbon dioxide at Mars. Plate tectonics recycle materials. When things build up, you need to mix things. Earthworms are function, and groundhogs are good at mixing up soil and tilling it in a way, but you really need bigger than that. So plate tectonics recycle things from the bottom of the ocean floor, things that filter out and go around. The moon is very important in inducing ocean tides and currents. So if we didn't have the circulation of currents, we wouldn't be moving things around, bring nutrients up there. So, you know, like the whales going up to eat plankton in the Arctic when they're in their growth time, if you didn't have those currents partially driven by the moon, it'd be stagnant. The water wouldn't be functional there. And of course, in tidal zone, the water has to go up and down. So you can have a mollusk or a clam or oyster that's in and out of the water. So they can feed what's there, but they need to be out for a while too. It has a molten core. If you go deeper into mines, you'll find that it gets hotter and hotter till we can't stand it. If we didn't have that, it would probably get way too cold. It moderates things. It's not mentioning here, but also the ocean moderates things. What's the longest day of the year? We just passed it. But that's not the hottest day of the year. The hottest day of the year is maybe 4 to 6 weeks later. Likewise, the shortest day of the year in December is not necessarily the coldest day of the year. It often comes 4 to 6 weeks later. And a lot of that is driven by the storage of heat in the oceans that moderate temperature. If we didn't have those oceans, not only would we not have fish or shrimp, if you like shrimp, we wouldn't have them, but the temperature swings would be much more extreme. We wouldn't have rainfall because water evaporates from the ocean, goes up in the clouds, and you see what happens outside here from that. That would be gone too. We need the right amount of oxygen. If we have too much oxygen, everything would burn up. Too little oxygen, and we couldn't exist. They say that at the oxygen, which is in the 20% range, what is it, 23, 26, 28, somewhere in the 20s, if that was much lower, you couldn't have multi-cell animals because you couldn't get oxygen into the interior at appropriate rate. And there's much, much more. What are the chances of all these things working and coming together here for us to exist? It really is a Goldilocks situation. So this is a second area, and another one of my talks really focuses on the planet. Third one I want to jump to is respiration and blood circulation. I had mentioned earlier that living things have a chemical energy. The food we take in goes through our bloodstream into the cells. It's transported there. But not only is food, in terms of like glucose, transported to our cells, but we need to have oxygen, because oxygen and glucose functioning together are the drivers of that energy. The waste products of that, the glucose and the oxygen, are carbon dioxide and water. We have to get rid of extra. Well, the bloodstream is really good at handling both of those. The bloodstream can take away carbon dioxide, which dissolves in the liquid. That's when you have a can of soda, that fizz is carbon dioxide in there. And so water can handle a lot of carbon dioxide in there. So we take that to the lungs, the carbon dioxide goes out, oxygen comes in, so there's very narrow membranes in the lungs that allow that to happen. That's this chemical reaction that's driving our bodies. Our bodies have the output of about roughly 100 watts. If you think of an old style incandescent light, 100-watt light bulb, that's about what your body is generating right now. And it starts that way at birth, goes to the end of your life. That engine has to keep running, because if it stops, you're dead. So this system has to last for all that time. The oxygen is carried by red blood cells. Oxygen doesn't want to stay in water very well. That's why fish are limited in how much energy they can exhibit. If you have a fish and fight them for a while, they get fatigued or tired. There are some fish that are more active, like tuna, for example, that can kind of store up some of that in their muscle tissue and fight for a longer time. But eventually they get fatigued. They can't handle it. They're not getting enough oxygen. They're not getting that CO2 out because there's just not enough oxygen in water to allow them to fight at a very high level. So when you're fighting a fish and you're getting to a point where the fish not fighting anymore, you've effectively starved them of oxygen. Their gills cannot get enough in to keep them at the high energy level of fighting. The red blood cells are really an amazing device or construction. Red blood cells are made at about 1 million a second in your body, in your bone marrow. It's the most common cell in your body, but it ejects the nucleus when it goes into your blood. So effectively, a red blood cell has hemoglobin in it, but it cannot reproduce. It's not really dead, but will no longer reproduce or grow. It's wearing itself out. And your red blood cells last, a matter of maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. And your kidneys are pulling out damaged red blood cells while your bone marrow is making new ones. So you're continually replacing at about 1 million a second. So you've got probably an order of 5 to 6 trillion red blood cells in your body. It's the most common cell in your body. That's going through there, handling the transport of oxygen to there. Incidentally, there's feedback mechanisms we'll talk about. When you go to sleep, you don't have to remember to breathe all night. Your body has sensors looking at CO2 and oxygen and will tell you when to breathe. Otherwise, we'd be in big trouble in the middle of the night if we won't stop breathing. So the oxygen is carried in red blood cells. The CO2 is carried out, dissolved in the blood, and we also have sugar, the glucose that's in our bloodstream that's going in there to generate the energy we need. So that's a chemical reaction. The transfer of CO2 out and oxygen occurs in our lungs. And it can't diffuse through something thick. The amoeba, or Chlamydomonas, has a very thin membrane around the outside. Oxygen can go in, CO2 can go out. That's how it can live without a heart, without lungs, without anything. It diffuses that way. But big structures like us, we can't do that fast enough. That's why we need to have a blood system to transport to the interior. How did that come about? The surface area in your lungs is about that of a basketball court. So imagine taking something and folding it and folding it and folding it, 1 cell thick. That's about how thick it is. Oh, and another little tidbit. I don't know if you ever heard of a surfactant that keeps things from sticking. Your lungs have surfactant. Otherwise, when you breathe out, the moist cell alveoli would collapse and you couldn't get air back in. So there has to be a way to allow these cells with every breath to expand and collapse without sticking shut like a wet plastic bag. So there's a lot of engineering in there that's not obvious that I think, again, the evolutionist approach just kind of skips over. Well, of course it's that way. Here we are. You know, it's like, well, wait a minute, you're missing the fine tuning. You're missing what it takes to make this work. If you were going to build a lung, what would it take you to do that? Here's an example or a test for you. How many times can you fold a sheet of paper? The general answer is, depending on how thick it is and the size of the paper, you can probably fold it 6 times. Fold it again and again and again. Maybe if you had very thin tissue and a big sheet of paper, you might be able to fold it 8 or 9 times. Now try and imagine taking a basketball court and folding it inside your lung cavity. We can't imagine that. The engineering to make our lungs is far beyond what we could do. So if you have kids at home, there would be a challenge for them saying, how many times can you fold a sheet of paper? If you can fold that sheet of paper 10 times, I'll give you $1, $5 or something. You'll teach them about how hard it is to get things folded that much. So again, I think we have another example, another aspect of a dead end where it just doesn't work. I'm going to stop here a minute because I did offer to answer questions. And maybe you're just getting blasted like sipping out of a fire hose. I'm telling you too much. So let me stop. Are there any questions at this point? Otherwise, I'm going to go on a little more.
You say you have this information on a back table or something?
Some limited amount. I mean, there's Discovery Institute website probably has 50 books. And they have fellows who write very thick, detailed books like 300, 500 pages long. I didn't bring any of those because not many people are willing to dig into them. But I have something, I think I've got a couple of what is called the in a nutshell things. So they look at some aspects like this idea of, it's titled Factories That Make Factories, which really looks into the ribosome. How could you get that started? What does it take? And it kind of explores that over about maybe 15 pages. So the In a Nutshell series, there's probably, I'm going to guess, 6 to 10 of those that cover issues like the Cambrian explosion. How did all these things appear in a fossil record all at once? How did some of these other things work? How could this happen? So I'll have some things up at the end here that gives you maybe a way to that website and ideas of where to get more resources. Or another possibility, you can talk to Pastor John if you want to hear some of these in more detail. Again, they're more packaged like 40 to 50-minute pieces because often I talk in a classroom environment, and that's kind of a appropriate length of time because it's hard to focus for much longer than that. Congratulations on being able to listen this far. So anyway, okay, does that pretty well answer that question? Okay. Anyone else at this point? Let me jump to another topic. And this is probably one of the ones that I get the most positive feedback on because it's easy to understand and yet it's really amazing. How could caterpillars change into butterflies? So caterpillar, we can understand how maybe caterpillars would start with an egg, grow into caterpillars, and at the end, after a month or 2 months or whatever, the caterpillars would lay an egg, which would then lead to another caterpillar. But that's not what happens. Those caterpillars go into a chrysalis or a cocoon, and they reconfigure themselves. I mean, total, this is not like Harry Houdini escaping from something. Literally, their body dissolves and it reconfigures into a whole new structure. And it doesn't die in the process. It is still alive while it's dissolving and reconfiguring. A caterpillar's eyes are very poor. They can barely see light and dark, and they can find their way over a leaf to eat the leaf. If there's time at the end, I might show you an MP4 video really expanding on this idea from a movie called Metamorphosis. So it gets better eyes. It has a proboscis. Before it had a mouth. So a caterpillar is basically a eating tube. Food goes in one end, it grows by a huge percentage from the little egg to a big caterpillar and then stops eating. There's a signal in there where it tells it to stop eating, goes into the cocoon or chrysalis and reconfigures. Didn't have a proboscis before. Somehow there's a code in there for building a proboscis. It digests nectar. When it was eating the plant, it's heavy on carbs. You know, eating the thing of the plant, the leaves of the plant. We think of milkweed for like a monarch butterfly, just eating that special thing, and then absorbing the toxins in there that keeps bird from eating the monarch butterfly. They've learned that that's bad for them. So again, it's developed this response to keep it alive. But the digestive system of the butterfly lives on nectar. So it doesn't eat plants anymore. It doesn't chew. It sips through this proboscis, which is actually built in 2 pieces, comes together and connects after the butterfly comes out of the cocoon and gets its cell. Plus, it's quite long. It's almost the length of the butterfly itself, but it rolls up. It's designed to stay out of the way so it can move around. It's got wings. And of course, that's the defining feature, wings. But it's much more than just wings. I mean, can you imagine a butterfly with 1 wing? Imagine a butterfly with 2 wings. It really can't balance right. It really needs these. There's a coordinated movement between the front and hind wings that allow it to move forward when it flaps its wings. How did the muscles get in there? It's one thing, so, I'm going to grow some wings, but here it's got muscles that are configured properly And it comes out and it can immediately start flapping its wings. It knows what to do. It inflates its wings, which are condensed, wrapped up inside there, and then within maybe an hour, it's ready to fly. Plus, it has a stiff body. If it was a big, chunky body like a sausage, how would you attach the wings? It would just not aerodynamic. It couldn't really move. It's got long legs because it needs to sit on a plant where before it's just hanging on there. Okay, how could it reconfigure? Where did the information arise? You cannot imagine a caterpillar going in a cocoon and coming out with a stiff body. That's no advantage. There's no evolutionary advantage. Having a proboscis is no advantage. Having wings is no advantage unless it's got all these other things. So really, this is an example of irreducible complexity. If the butterfly was missing these things, it would just not be effective at all. So how can it do that? Where did information arise? These are all the pieces. Another piece is how long would it take?
Can I say something about?
Sure.
When it's in the cocoon, if you would open the cocoon, it would be all liquid. It's not going from a caterpillar to a butterfly. It turns into liquid and then reforms itself within that cocoon.
Is there any part of the caterpillar that survives this transition, or like, we have a brain, but is there anything that is in both places? It was in the caterpillar and also is in the butterfly?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, probably not, because they're going with the little feet and then they change their diet and they change their mode of locomotion and all that. So it's completely different animal, but it isn't. And it just takes, how did that happen?
But there is transfer of information through there because the caterpillar was eating the milkweed plant and it lays its eggs on the milkweed plant. So there is continuity of knowing that milkweed plant and being able to recognize the milkweed plant to lay the eggs on it. The questions, the deeper you dig, the more questions you get of how did this work. And the evolutionary approach is, well, we haven't done it all yet. We haven't figured it out, but there is an answer out there somewhere. I think that's way too much faith. I don't have enough faith to be an evolutionist or an atheist. So the information is in there is like the information in a computer. How did that come about? So if we really look at all these things, I think the source of that information is intelligent designer. That's the handprint of a designer that we see out there that all comes together, the source of information. So when birds adapt somewhat, like Darwin's finches, they talk about the beaks changing shape. That range of beak shape was built into the finches there. They could handle dry years, wet years with changing beak shape. That's like kind of elasticity that's in there. But they're always finches. They didn't go from finches into hawks or something. So things that are existing can adapt within a certain range, but they're always the same. I don't know if you ever heard Lenski. Have you heard that name? It's a long-term evolution experiment at a university where they took a bunch of E. coli bacteria, put them in flasks, and incubated them. And over a period of a day or so, you'll have maybe 5 generations or 7 generations, depending on the temperature that's used. The next day, they take some out as a sample and compare it to what they had, and then inoculate new tubes, and then repeat that experiment. They've done that now for dozens of years. I think they're up at maybe 75, 80,000 generations. But the changes that occur have been very slight, very minor. You haven't gone from amoeba to fish or something like that. But they're saying, well, we just haven't done it long enough. The answer is you throw it a billion years or two and suddenly all kinds of other things happen. Well, we've got 75,000 generations. Can we see a little more change going on? It's not happening. So that's kind of a negative example or limitation of what evolution experiments can do. They've lost their ability to metabolize certain things, so there have been slight changes, but nothing positive, always negative. They're losing functionality. So what does this really mean? Let's look again at kind of the postulate we had. What worldview makes sense to you? Can random processes result in what we see around us? Or is there an intelligent designer out there? And I give you a third option. Is there another one that I've missed? When I talk about this, no one has come up with a third choice yet. Seems like there's only two worldviews out there that are out there. Maybe someone will come up with another one, but right at this point, we're looking at those two. So that's kind of where we stand right now. The data I've given you is in those books. I'll come back there and answer questions. I want to acknowledge Betsy, who helped me. She's heard this most of the time, so if I do something wrong, she fixes it, and I don't say that again. I've had a number of other people I've worked with. That eye progression chart came from Encyclopedia Britannica, so it's a very high visibility source of what those look like. And then Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, really goes through the mousetrap and a few other things. I mean, these are not the only examples. Another one is blood clotting. There's about 22 steps in blood clotting where your body sends a certain signal and does this and does that. Not only is it important to get those signals going so your blood clots so you don't die, like a hemophiliac might have that problem, but you also have to stop blood clotting. Because if it just kept going, pretty soon you're just solid with your whole system is clotted. So, and then you've got to remove the scab at the end. So there's a lot of steps that are necessary to do this. I had mentioned there are some other resources. Betsy and I did a paper on a quantitative model which went through how long it would take, how many different choices are there that are, again, these numbers that are hard to fathom to us. Some groups of people, they have a very simple counting system, 1, 2, 3, many. That's as far as it goes, because you can teach your little kids to count to 100, but it takes a long time to understand what 100 is. And then, what is 1,000? But when you get into millions, what is a million? That's like the number of Starbucks in Wisconsin. We can't understand how big that number is. It's beyond belief. We can't comprehend amazing numbers. But these numbers go far beyond that. People who try and do calculations of what they would be, they have a definition of impossible. That would be 1 with 50 zeros behind it. So if you have one chance in 10 to the 50, that's one definition of impossible. If it doesn't happen, it's like getting a royal flush or something like that. It could happen, but functionally it's impossible. Well, if that's not good enough, go to 1 in 10 to 100. That's another level of impossibility. And what can happen? I don't think that one, you can come up with an example of when that worked. In theory, you could, but in practical, that number is beyond understanding. I also mentioned here Darwin's Black Box, which is an excellent story of some of these things. And the concept there is evolution has this black box. You put stuff in, and it comes out the other end together. It's like, how did that happen? We don't know. They don't know, but it happened. It's there. Here we are kind of approach. The Privileged Planet is a wonderful video to look at. There's a Store at Discovery Institute website, which has these books and more books in it. There's dozens of books over there. And I want to stop at this point and let you think about this as the punchline. What does this mean for your life? Is your worldview solid, or do you need to reinvestigate your worldview? Has some of this data strengthened or weakened your worldview? It's very important to have a worldview. And of course, that's why we go to church, to learn a worldview. But it's not intelligent design. Intelligent design, as I said, is complementary to that. Say there is intelligence out there. It's not random, and here's the data for it. But the next step is, where is that intelligence? Who has it? And that's why I think most of you are going to church, just to learn about that source of that intelligence and tie into that intelligence. So at this point, I want to stop, and there's a couple options here. One is I can take more questions. I could show you I think it's about a 7-minute video on metamorphosis, which is available on a website called John 10:10. It's Illustra Media makes a lot of films on intelligent design. They're also available out there. And this is a free trailer that you can actually download and look at yourself. And I've downloaded, I've got it here. So that would be one option, or I can go back to, so questions. So, Pastor John, do you have a suggestion?
Well, let's hold up for a couple of questions. I think the video would be interesting to see as well, because I know that videos, those type of videos are really good. But one question, maybe you could speak to, so when you're interacting with someone who's not a believer and you want to introduce this worldview, you can get kind of lost in the facts. Is there any tips or advice you would share from your experience in how you interact with people with this knowledge that you've accumulated, or advice on how we can begin to share this knowledge with others?
Okay, now I kind of move out of intelligent design and go back to church view. You really need the Holy Spirit to convict them to reassess their worldview. You aren't going to convince anyone their worldview is wrong. You're going to get them thinking about their worldview and have them read some books and do it. So I wouldn't say having discussions with people work very far. They need to think about it, because they don't want you pushing this other view on them. They want to take it, maybe read some books, think about it. So I think it has to work slower. What we can do is put the data out there and get them started thinking about these questions of how could this happen.
Have you found certain topics to be more more, let's just say, interesting to other people? Or, like butterflies is always a fascinating thing, or do you like to kind of just feel them out to what interest they have, and then you go find something that they're interested in? Or are there certain topics that just always work, or it's a good starting point?
I find most positive response to the butterfly. Metamorphosis, everyone knows butterflies. People like butterflies. They've heard about monarchs. They understand the idea of a chrysalis and a change. But this talk really goes into a lot more detail about what's happening inside and getting them thinking about all the changes have to occur at the same time. So intelligent design talks, I don't know if I can mention all of them, but you've heard some of the topics. One is kind of cosmology. Why is the Earth the way it is? Why is it so well adjusted and other planets are? We're looking at exoplanets. There's something over 6,000 planets outside our solar system that have been identified through various means. Some of them, they think there might be some things in the atmosphere that would be tied to life, but most of them are not. Most of them are just, no, it can't work. It's too close to the sun, too far from the sun, elliptical orbits, all these problems out there. So cosmology, but biology has most of them. Mathematics a little bit with his, what are the chances of calculating how, but that's probably the least positive, because I think people don't like mathematics that much. There's a book called The Design Inference that really uses Bayesian statistics to go through this idea of that's impossible. It says we're going to define impossible, so these things are past impossible. But I don't like Bayesian statistics, and so I'm not going to try and teach people that concept. But I can tell you what the book is if you want to read it. So it goes from caterpillars and butterflies that people understand and can go at a low level up to things that are very mathematical and complicated, and everywhere in between. A lot of biology, because that's where the complexity is.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any questions before we see the film?
I think I wanted to just mention another thing that, when I was working in the lab, went back, after I raised my family, got their own school full time, I went back to the lab again. And I was probably older than my boss. I was in my 40s, and he just graduated from his PhD, and I worked at papers before.
Sorry, I'm trying to stop it right now. Okay.
But anyways, they respected me because I was older, and the lab I was in Boulder, Colorado, which is kind of the second tier labs in the nation. So we had really good students there. And I ended up getting cancer, and I just kept working and went to my chemo. So I just went to work bald, and people knew me by that time because I've been working there for maybe 10 years. And when no one else was around, they'd come up to me and going, "Aren't you afraid of dying?" And I'd say, "No, I know where I'm going." And, and then others would come up when no one else was around, because they're all trying to impress each other. They'll say, "I went to Alliance when I was little." And I said, "That's very good." I was just kind of mocking them, but it was fun. God just gave me this, through the cancer, he just gave me this opportunity to have these kids, take a second look at God. So, just wanted to share that. Yeah, it was fun. It was really fun, because I'm not the kind of person to say, "Hey, let me tell you about Jesus." It's just not comfortable that way, but they came to ask me what was missing. So that was very cool. I think
Just one comment. When I remember evolution class, we were talking about evolution. We got into the class that evolutionists are an amazing thing, but when they have a baby born, what's the first question they ask? Is he normal? Is there any different? Now, of course, I'm not talking about it, but what's that little spot? And maybe that's going to form into something. No, we got to get rid of that, because it's not. We can't see evolution happening, but we can understand that it did. You know what I'm saying? I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing.
Okay, and I apologize for this thing starting to play. I thought I could have stopped it, but my screen was off the edge, my stop button. So here it is. Again, let me tell you, this is something from Illustra Media. At the end, it shows you where it is. It's called the John 10:10 Project, which kind of goes about God being active in there.
On a planet bursting with mystery and wonder, perhaps no phenomena triggers a sense of the miraculous more clearly than the life cycle of a butterfly. Depending upon its species, a female butterfly can lay hundreds of eggs during her brief lifetime. Each initiates an extraordinary process of growth and transformation.
The eggs are remarkable in themselves. They have species-specific architectures, some of which are just astonishing. For instance, if you look at a monarch egg, it has a beautiful symmetrical structure. It looks like a little miniature dome or cathedral.
Ranging in size from a pinhead to the width of a child's fingernail, each egg is attached to a plant by an adhesive fluid secreted by the butterfly. They are lined with a coating of wax that helps keep them moist and viable. In many species, the eggs hatch within a week. Then the newly emerged caterpillar, or larva, wastes no time embarking on the second stage of its journey to adulthood.
We call them eating machines because that's their only purpose in life is to just eat and grow.
It's just much. Slice and chew, slice and chew to build up the raw materials for the next stage of life.
A caterpillar could gain weight so fast that it would be eating its own weight, leafy material every day.
Equipped with powerful jaws and a digestive tract that extends the length of its body, this stomach with legs can multiply its birth rate more than 3,000 times in less than 2 weeks.
To show you how remarkable this weight gain is, imagine you had an 8-pound human baby, and he multiplied his weight 3,000 times as he was growing. That would be a 24,000-pound child. That's a big kid.
A caterpillar's growth is punctuated by violent surges of transition called molts.
Imagine the outer skin of a caterpillar as being sort of like a wetsuit. It's got a little bit of stretch to it, but limited. It's waterproof, so they don't dehydrate. Now, as the caterpillar grows, it fills out that wetsuit, and eventually it reaches a point where it can't grow anymore, and it has to make a new, larger version on the inside.
A molt begins when a caterpillar spins and then grasps a silk pad, anchors its body securely with small barbs on its legs, and splits its skin near the capsule covering its head.
There are sensors in the cuticle, in the skin of the caterpillar, that are strain detectors. They detect the amount of pressure or strain being put on the skin. And when that is too great, they send a signal to the brain of the caterpillar, which then releases a hormone that causes molting.
After several molts, the caterpillar stops eating, finds a secluded spot, and spins another silk pad. When finished, it attaches itself with a pair of claspers on the end of its body, then hangs, almost motionless.
It will hang there for a day or so, usually in a J position. All kinds of chemical reactions occur within that caterpillar. It changes color and you have no idea what's going on inside there until all of a sudden it pumps the fluid so that the skin begins to split.
Stage of a butterfly's development and the appearance of a remarkable structure called a chrysalis. As the old skin is pushed away, the cremaster, a thin extension on the top of the chrysalis, works its way into position to permanently grasp the silk pad. With a scanning electron microscope, the cremaster is magnified more than 500 times.
The caterpillar has microscopic hooks on the cremaster, and it attaches those hooks to that silk pad that it puts on the bottom of a leaf or twig. And it begins to spin, and this caterpillar spins and spins and spins because it wants to get rid of that old skin that it has.
During the hour that follows, the chrysalis hardens and takes its final form, as one of the most fascinating processes in nature is set into motion. The metamorphosis from caterpillar into butterfly.
What you see in a chrysalis is not a shapeless mass, but in fact, something very much like a mold for the adult butterfly.
You see the wing pads where the adult wings are going to form. You see the head and the compound eyes appear, visible through the outer case of the pupal shell. Abdominal segments are very clearly separated from the thoracic segments where the wings are going to be attached. All of this is astoundingly new compared to the caterpillar, where everything was sort of the same down the whole length of the body.
In a metamorphic insect, what you've got is two body plans. You have to first form one functional body plan, and then you have to switch gears and you have to take and form a new body plan. I am amazed by development when it goes from egg to caterpillar, because it's such an intricate process. But then you have to enter into the chrysalis stage and you have to get it right again. So it's like the problem squared.
The creation of a butterfly begins with the partial destruction of the caterpillar. Inside the chrysalis, larval cells that form the caterpillar's limbs and organs are systematically digested and broken down.
You've got to get rid of or digest the caterpillar tissues. They won't work for the adult. In fact, the cells themselves disappear, but then their components are recycled and are turned into a kind of soup out of which the adult structures will be built.
The magnitude of this transformation has been compared to a Model T Ford that suddenly encases itself within a garage. Inside, most of the car breaks down into fragments of metal, rubber, and glass. These pieces then reorganize themselves into components more complex than any that previously existed in the Model T. After several days, the garage door bursts open and a radically different mode of transportation lifts off into the sky.
Now, an analogy like that is pure whimsy. But even if it were somehow possible, I don't think turning a car into a helicopter would be nearly as impressive as the actual transformation that takes place inside a chrysalis. It's impossible to look at a caterpillar turning into a butterfly and not ask how. How did this happen? How is it regulated? How is it controlled? This astonishing, remarkable transformation. When you process all the evidence revealed through metamorphosis, and then you ask yourself, in your own experience, what kind of cause could bring about these results? I think the only reasonable answer is an intelligence that transcends the natural world. A designer with foresight and a sense of engineering and artistry, and the ability to light up the sky on a summer afternoon with magnificent evidence that life on Earth is the product of something greater than a blind, undirected process.
as I had mentioned, that video is freely available. So you could go to the John 10:10 website and show it to someone. And John, that might be a question or an answer to your question of how do you talk to people from an atheistic point of view, rather than trying to tell them the answer. It says, look at this, what do you think of that? And have them think about it, because they need to process it internally. Because your worldview is pretty well fossilized, and it's hard to work in changing that. So you got to challenge people to dig kind of deep and work on it. So maybe that's the best answer to that. Have other questions come up? If not, I think I will go back to the table there and explain more about the books and talk to people individually.
Let me just come up real quick here. Well, I want to give a hand to Tom for all the work, and Betsy behind the scenes. And you guys are out here every year, right? Visiting
Yes.
family and friends, so we were able to.
We both grew up in Wisconsin, but we raised our kids out in Colorado, so.
So they come by here and visit, and so thank you so much. Definitely check out some of the resources in the back, but there's one passage, though, that I did want to read as you were going through this that came to my mind, and, it talked about earth being the Goldilocks. Isaiah 45:18, for thus says Yahweh, who created the heavens, he is the God who formed the earth and made it. He established it and did not create it a formless place. Some of your translations will say vain, but formed it to be inhabited. I am Yahweh and there is none else. And it's just a great reminder, this place is special. Isaiah 45:18. And Paul uses the word metamorphosis to talk how we're going to be changed from glory to glory. And you think the butterfly is going through a change, wait until we are transformed into the body of Christ, so to speak. Resurrection and all that.
My pleasure to come and do it. It's kind of my role at this point in life to do this, and I'm willing to come back and go into some of this in more detail or repeat it for a different group.
Well, thank you. And so take advantage of Tom while he's here.